Welcome back, and I hope that you are ready for us to continue with the lesson. In front of you again, you have the concept map that shows you that we are now on our fourth concept that looks at the components of the circulatory system and the function of each of these components. Okay. We'll first look at the heart. Now, the heart is a muscular organ that is located in the chest cavity. It is divided into 4 chambers. And as you can see there in your diagram, there's separation there in the middle and also in the first half, as in top and bottom, and then also top and bottom on the other side. The upper chambers are called the atria together. If it's one chamber which is on top, it's called the atrium. I'll just write S to show that it's singular for one atrium. Then the atria, the function of the atria is to receive blood from veins that are entering the heart. Now these are the veins that receive blood that will enter the heart. You also have other sets of veins. Let me just label the veins. When moving on to the next slides, we will see what these veins are called and what the other functions are. Now the lower chambers here at the bottom, those are called the ventricles. And for singular, it's one ventricle, and then we have 2 ventricles. The ventricles are responsible for pumping blood out of the heart through arteries. We have these arteries, a set of arteries. I'll just write 1 to show that it's the same artery. And then we also have this artery. This is the main artery of the heart. And also something that is important in life sciences is that whenever you are looking at a diagram or a representation of a model of some sort. On the diagram, the right will appear to be on your left, and the left will appear to be on your right. We then move on to looking at our second component, which is the blood vessels. And in front of you, you have a diagrammatic representation of what these blood vessels look like. Something that's important when we look at the circulatory system, you will note that there are blood vessels that are red and those that are blue. Our body does not have blue blood vessels, but this is a way of showing the kind of blood that is carried. So blue will represent blood that is deoxygenated or oxygen-poor blood. So the first blood vessel is called the artery. It has thicker walls compared to the veins, what we have alongside here. And as you can see, the lining there will show you that this is thicker than the veins. These accommodate the high pressure of blood. And remember, you will see when we look at the heart as a whole, why the arteries, mainly the main artery known as the aorta, accommodates the high pressure of blood. Moving on to our second blood vessel, we have the veins. They have thinner walls compared to the arteries. The blood flows back to the heart as a result of muscle action. And in our tip box, something to help you remember, arteries transport oxygenated blood, but there's an exception for the pulmonary artery. The word pulmonary refers to lungs, and we will see how the pulmonary artery does not carry oxygenated blood like all the other arteries in the body. To remember the function of the artery, we say that because artery starts with the letter A, we should remember that it carries blood away from the heart and it transports the oxygenated blood to different parts of the body. Veins transport deoxygenated blood except for the pulmonary vein. Now, veins carry blood to the heart. We already know that if the arteries are carrying the blood away from the heart, then the veins will be carrying the blood to the heart. And we will always should take note of the two exceptions for the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary vein. Lastly, the third type of blood vessel is called the capillaries. And as you can see in the middle there, those are very thin, and they're also thinner than the walls of the arteries and the veins. These facilitate in the exchange of substances between the blood in the capillaries and the interstitial fluid, meaning the fluid that is flowing in between the blood vessels there. Okay, we now move on to looking at the blood. Blood is a fluid tissue. It's basically a type of tissue, which is a fluid. And we have what we call red blood cells that are also known as erythrocytes. These carry oxygen and carbon dioxide. The red blood cells are these red circles there and there. Then we have the blood platelets. So there are the blood platelets there. Their function is to allow blood to clot. And then we have white blood cells, also known as leukocytes. These protect the body against diseases. And these would be our leukocytes. These are our blood cells. And then lastly, we have our blood plasma, which is the actual fluid of blood that transports nutrients, hormones, and proteins. Something interesting is that blood plasma is actually a clear color. What gives blood the red color would be the red blood cells. So the darker the color of your blood, that means there's a greater presence or more presence of red blood cells in the blood. And something interesting too, basically, how do we know that the blood is made up of these 4 different parts? We have a machine called a centrifuge, which is used to separate various components of the blood. It's basically a machine where test tubes with your blood are placed in this machine, and this machine spins, and in the spinning process, well, you will see, for example, there's the separation of the different blood cells, like the red blood cells there at the bottom, basically shows you what blood is composed of. Now looking at our concept map, we move to our fifth concept, which looks at the circulation of blood, and this is a process in the circulatory system. Here we will be looking at how the different components we have mentioned and their functions are basically adapted to perform their functions in this system. In front of you, you have a diagram showing you the heart, as I am showing, and the lungs above. Well, in reality, your heart is more or less in the same position in your chest cavity, and not like that. This is just a diagram to show you the circulation of the blood between the heart and the lungs, where there's an exchange of gases and what happens when the blood moves back to the heart. Before we look at this diagram, please note that blue shows that blood vessels are carrying deoxygenated blood or oxygen poor blood, and red shows that the blood vessels are carrying oxygenated blood. We will also learn about valves, and these are structures that help prevent the backward flow of blood. Let me just change this to black so you are able to see it. This is the heart, and these are the lungs. Okay, firstly, we have deoxygenated blood in the blue blood vessels, and we will be looking at how deoxygenated blood from the lower part of the body, meaning from your legs, your kidneys, and other parts that are below your body, bring blood into the heart. They bring the blood, the deoxygenated, into the heart through the inferior vena cava, which is this one. And deoxygenated blood coming from the upper part of the body is carried by the superior vena cava. Vena cava tells us this is a main vein of the body. So deoxygenated blood from the bottom part of the body move into the heart, but they move into a specific part, and being the first chamber called the atrium. As we have learned, we have said that my left will be right on paper, and my right in real life will be left on paper whenever we are looking at diagrams in life sciences of specifically of organs in the human body. So this is the right atrium. So deoxygenated blood moves from the different parts of the body, and it moves through the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava into the right atrium. Okay, now once the deoxygenated blood is in the right atrium, it has to move to the right ventricle. But in moving from the right atrium to the right ventricle, it passes through a valve called the atrioventricular valve. As the name suggests, atrio meaning atrium, ventricular referring to the ventricles, or if you are not calling it or referring to this valve as the atrioventricular valve, you can also call it the tricuspid valve. This refers to the number of flaps that this valve has, and the prefix tri tells us that it has 3 flaps. So the deoxygenated blood will move from the right atrium through the atrioventricular valve or the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. Once the deoxygenated blood is in the right ventricle, it needs to move to the lungs, but it first needs to move through a pulmonary valve. We know that pulmonary refers to lungs. So this is the valve that is found here in the pulmonary artery that prevents, let me fix that. Right atrium. The blood moves from the right ventricle, and there's a valve here between the ventricle and the pulmonary artery, sorry. And remember when we were looking at the different components of the circulatory system, and we looked at blood vessels, we mentioned that all arteries carry oxygenated blood, but we said that there's an exception for the pulmonary artery. As we can see here, the pulmonary artery, this being the pulmonary artery, is blue, which shows that it is carrying deoxygenated blood. So as the name of this artery tells us, or suggests, it tells us that the blood is now moving to the lungs. When the blood moves to the lungs, gaseous exchange happens there, where carbon dioxide is exchanged for oxygen. The oxygen-rich blood will then move through what we call the pulmonary vein. And again, as we said, when we were looking at the blood vessels, we did say that there's an exception again for this type of vein, because all veins we know carry deoxygenated blood, but the pulmonary vein carries oxygenated blood, and it is transporting the oxygenated blood to the heart again. And when it moves to the heart, from the lungs to the heart, it moves into the left ventricle. Oh, sorry, the left atrium, not the ventricle. The left atrium. And we know by now that when blood moves, or when blood is in the atrium, it will then move into the ventricle. And in this case, it moves into the left ventricle. It moves through another atrioventricular valve, or what we call a bicuspid valve. And as the word bi, or prefix bi, suggests that it is a valve with 2 flaps. So it will move through the atrioventricular valve, or the bicuspid valve, into the left atrium. Once the blood is in the left ventricle, there is another valve that will help prevent the backward flow of blood in the aorta, and this is called a semilunar valve, semi meaning half. So it will be transported to the aorta, where the aorta will split into smaller blood vessels, and a smaller version of an aorta is called an artery, and then it will split and distribute the new and oxygenated blood to different parts of the body. The oxygenated blood is transported to the bottom half of the body and also the top half or top parts of the body. We have now reached the final topic of our circulatory system, and this being health issues. We will look at the first health issue, and this is called high blood pressure or hypertension. The cause of high blood pressure is when the pressure of blood pushing against the artery walls is consistently too high. This results or can lead to strokes, heart attacks, or organ damage. For example, a damaged kidney. Alongside, you have an apparatus used by doctors to help measure your blood pressure. Second health issue is called a stroke. And strokes are caused by cells in the brain that do not receive oxygen. It can also be caused by a blockage in the blood vessel transporting blood to the brain. A blood vessel in the brain that is burst or ruptured can be the cause of a stroke. And this will result in parts of the brain being damaged. Someone who has suffered a stroke will lose the ability to speak and may have memory problems. Parts of the body may become paralyzed. Strokes result in disability or death. The next health issue and the last health issue that we will be looking at is a heart attack. A heart attack can be caused by blood vessels becoming narrow, or it can be caused by blood clots that develop in a blood vessel. This will result in the reduction of the blood flow to the heart, less oxygen flowing from the heart to the body, and can sometimes result in death. That's it for today. I hope you learned a lot and you were interested in everything that was discussed regarding the circulatory system.